The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Blumkin. I'm here on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network with my co-host David Nemec, bringing you David Nemec's old-time history and trivia. And as usual, our guest is Ian Kahanowitz. And today we're going to be discussing the 1967 and 1968 seasons. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Al. Good to be with you again.
Okay. Do either of you want to start on 1967? Because a few things happened that season.
I think it was one of the most, it turned out to be one of the most exciting and interesting seasons ever. And there, we could easily spend the whole hour just talking about 1967. And, certainly the last few days of the season, with four teams, still in contention, I can't think of a season that was quite like it.
Well, it actually got down to three the last week.
Well, three by the final day.
Yeah, the White Sox were eliminated by, if I remember correctly, by losing a doubleheader to the last place Kansas City A's.
Yeah, and the Tigers split a doubleheader with the Angels, and
that's the last day of the season.
Both games.
Yeah,
and if they had won both games, it would have.
Yeah, but they had to make a game up because I think the Friday night game was rained out.
Yeah.
So they had to play a doubleheader, and the Red Sox had won their game, and waiting for the outcome of the second Tiger Angel game, which the Angels won.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been a two-way tie. It could have been,
Yeah, the National League, on the other hand, the Cardinals, I believe that won by 8.5 games. They won that fairly easily. They had put together the team was most noted for being on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and the 9 stars with Bob Gibson as a pitcher were getting paid combined with getting paid the unheard amount of $630,000. That wouldn't buy you a month of a middle infielder these days.
Yeah, right.
A utility infielder.
Exactly.
But let's discuss the Cardinals. The Cardinals came after '64. They unloaded their entire infield, who were getting up there in years, aside from Julio and Javier. And I believe they moved Mike Shannon to third base. They had right-hitting Dow Maxwell at short. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I got into a little session on Facebook comparing the offensive stats of Dow Maxwell with another great slugger of that period, Bobby Wine. And they were comparable. And the first baseman, they had gotten Orlando Cepeda missed most of the 1965 season with a severe knee injury. And when he came back to the Giants considered him expendable, and they sent him to the Cardinals fairly early in the season for Ray Sadecki, who was the 20-game winner in 1964, but would never see those kind of heights again. And their outfield was Lou Brock, who they had gotten from the Cubs in the steal in 1964, Kurt Flood in center, and Roger Maris, who they picked up from the Yankees over the winter for a nondescript third baseman named Charlie Smith. And the catcher was Tim McCarver, and the pitchers were Bob Gibson, Nellie Browls, Ray Washburn, and Steve Carton, who was basically beginning his career for them. And they won the pennant fairly easily in the National League. The American League, as you just mentioned, was quite a different story.
And I can't say enough about the '67 Red Sox. Remember, I live in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt for 1 minute to interject one guy you got to take into consideration from '67 Cardinals and their pitching, who really, I think, what came through in a big way, and it was a huge surprise with Dick Hughes.
Yeah.
Tremendous rookie year.
And that was it.
That was pretty much it. That was
yeah.
it. He was gone not too long into the 1968 season. Never seen again.
Okay, Ian, you were going to start on the 67 Red Sox?
Yeah, not since 1958 had the Boston Red Sox had a winning team. Now, you had change of manager. You had Dick Williams, who would manage the A's to 2 of their 3 World Series out in the 70s. But he came in. He was going to shake things up. To tell you how bad the Red Sox had sunk, on opening day there was just little over 8,000 attendees at the stadium. The Red Sox were pretty much dead after Ted Williams retired in the early 1960s, after the 60 season. No one came. No one cared. You had Carl Yastrzemski, who literally just took the team on its back, and he went ballistic the last 2 weeks of the season on a tear. And again, he was their veteran at 27.
Yeah.
It began what was called Red Sox Nation. It was called the Impossible Dream. No one predicted this team to do any better than what it did the year before. It surprised everyone in New England. I think the biggest surprise was Jim Lonberg. He was 21-9 for the season. And, you had the injury to Tony C over there in his eye. And, again, that was another power hitter taken away. But,
they got Ken Harrelson, and when Finley, who was playing for the A's at the time, and Finley got into a rage over some behavior of the team on the flight. And he suspended a couple of players. I think Luke Krause, the pitcher, was one of them. And Harrelson ripped Finley publicly, and Finley outright released him, which made him a free agent, which, of course, in those days was unheard of. And there was a bidding war for him, and the Red Sox got him, I think, for $75,000. He helped fill the void left by Canigliaro's injury.
Yeah. And he mentioned on this, Dave.
Pardon me?
And he mentioned on the 67 Red Sox. You want to chime in on that?
I think you both were pretty much covered it. They were, they finished 11th the year before. Certainly, I didn't expect anything much from them.
They're 9th the year
I really
before,
never expected anything much.
Just barely beat the Yankees out.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, for Roger Maris, in speaking to Fritz Peterson, and he was on the 67 Yankees, he was on the 66 Yankees, the doctor misdiagnosed Roger Maris's hand in 66. So he played all season with a broken bone.
Hand, yeah.
And then that was pretty much fixed once he got to St. Louis.
Yeah.
And he was able to contribute. I mean, I think the first home run he hit went into the 9th row on the 9th seat, and it was just an omen for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah. They weren't a great power hitting team, but but in those days, pitching was in its ascendance, which would of course come to total fruition in 1968. But Cepeda led the league in RBIs with 111 in that season. And, the pitching was, and the Cardinals were based on pitching, speed, and defense. And they had some defenders there who were among, the best in the business. But, none of the other National League teams, the Dodgers, of course, were, weakened terribly by the Koufax retirement and the trade of Maury Wills. Wills would not, went home from a tour in Japan, after the season, and, Walter O'Malley was furious and ordered him traded, so they shipped him to the Pirates for, Bob Bailey and, Gene Michael. So the Cardinals were basically in the league by themselves in 1967. The challengers in the American League, both of whom finished one game out. Twins, because the Red Sox beat them the last 2 days of the season. But I think Yastrzemski won something like 6 for 8 or 7 for 8. And Detroit, McLean was having a first 20-game season, although he did miss some time purportedly because some thugs hit him in the legs after he failed to pay a debt to a bookie. That's the story I heard.
And that's true. If you ever spoke to Denny McLean, did you ever speak to Denny McLean?
No. He's one of my he's on my list for players I don't really have any use for.
Yeah, I spoke to Denny, and his wife in recent years is she has cancer, and he's going through a hard time now. But he was telling me, he got involved with the wrong people, and he had that fantastic season.
$1 million rum and 10 cent Ed.
Yeah, he had a good season in '69 too. Yeah, he was a good pitcher. He was a good pitcher. I saw him pitch.
I just said $1 million rum and 10 cent Ed. He threw it away.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, he did. He did, but
the Twins were led pitching wise by Jim Cott.
And
I think Blylov was there at that point.
I don't think so. I think he came in.
Yeah, Jim Cott won 25 games.
I think they had Jim Perry.
And they were paced by Tony Oliva. That was Rod Carew's rookie season.
But their big arm was Dean Chance.
Dean Chance, right? Yeah.
120.
Thank you, David.
And they had a pretty good staff. They had a solid staff with Chance and Cott. I think.
Yeah, and they came down to.
But look at the Red Sox. If you look at the Red Sox staff, after Lomberg, you had Gary Bell, and then you had two guys who started. Of their main four starters, the other two guys were both below 500.
They had Jose Santiago starting in the World Series game, and so did Gary Waslewski. He started the sixth game. I'm saying the sixth game in the World Series.
I mean, Brandon had one of the worst records ever on a pen-and-win team.
Bucky Brandon, yeah,
he's terrible.
And John Wyatt was their ace reliever. Raditz had already been traded. Raditz fell off very, very quickly. He had already been dealt to the Indians.
He did.
Just a few people who care. The Yankees finished ninth that year with a 7-2-90 record. And so the Red Sox won the last two games of the season over the Twins, put them one game up on the Twins. And as we mentioned earlier, the Tigers had played Saturday, a doubleheader Sunday because their Friday night game with the Angels was rained out, and they won that game, the first game, and then the Angels beat them in the second game, which I believe was piped into a national audience over radio.
It was.
I remember they didn't have ESPN back then.
The game in New York,
Yeah. And so we got to the 1967 World Series. Also, before we got away from the regular season, it turned out to be the last season for the Kansas City A's, who after that season would pick up and move to Oakland because Finley was looking to get out of Kansas City for a long time because he had trouble with the media and he did not like the old ballpark that they were in. So he started pitching around to places like Louisville, Dallas, Denver, and he wound up settling on Oakland. And I'm sure that didn't thrill the Giants very much because it made the Bay Area a two-team market.
Yeah, we should say a word, too, about the White Sox who hung in there, and they were the second coming of the hitless wonders. They finished with a .225 team batting average. And they're big. They didn't have I don't think they had a .250 hitter in their regular lineup. If I remember, guys like Don Buford were, in the 240s, and they had Ken Berry, Pete Ward, Tommy Agee. All those guys are below .250. And Walt Nonek, Williams.
Yeah.
Tom McGraw. None of those guys were much on offense. Some of them are pretty good defensively, and they even had Rocky Calavito, who was pretty much.
He was on the way down by the time they got him.
But they were desperate to bring in anybody who had anything. Ken Boyer, they brought in him. They just couldn't get any offensive production. Smokey Burgess was at the tail end of his career as pinch hitter, but they just couldn't put it together offensively, and that's what did them in. They had the best pitching staff.
Yeah, they had led by Joel Harlan and Gary Peters.
Team, but just couldn't score. They just couldn't score.
And as I mentioned earlier, the week before the regular season ended, they were still, part of the pennant race, and they went into Kansas City, which is the worst team in the American League that season, and lost a doubleheader to them, and that just basically took all the air out of them.
Yeah, it did. But they just couldn't get anybody who got hot toward the end of the season. Like if they'd had anything even close to a Yastrzemski in that last week, I think they would have won the pennant, and they would be talked about today, and the same terms as the Hitless Wonders are talked about, because they were
Eddie Stanky was the manager.
Yeah. I thought he got a lot out of that team, as much as he could. He's a very underrated manager.
And we can't forget about the '67 riots in Detroit. So it's really amazing how the Tigers hung in there while the whole city burned the summer of '67.
Yeah, that was really significant, and my sister was living in Detroit then. It was a tough time for them.
But they would make up for it the next season.
Well, the thing is that again, historically, this level of trouble that carries over into *68. And the whole '60s thing is really changing. You got Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles, you got these riots now. And then when we get to '68, that really has an impact, especially on Gibson. But
we'll get there in a couple of minutes. Let's discuss the '67 World Series. And the MVP of that series was Bob Gibson, who won 3 games, first 2 of which were shutouts, and he was named the most valuable player of the series. They won the series 4-3. The other winner, the winner of the other game in the series for them was Nelson Briles, who would go on to pitch a 2-hit shutout in Game 5 of the 1971 World Series for the Pirates. And Boston was using Lomborg, and Lomborg pitched a 1-hitter in the second game of the World Series. He gave up a double to Julian Javier in the 8th inning for the Cardinals' only hit. But the Cardinals went up 3-1, and the Red Sox battled back. Lomborg gave up 1 run in winning the 5th game, and they were spent for a starter. They had used Jose Santiago and Gary Bell without any effect in the 2 games that they had lost, and Game 3 and Game 4. And they started a pitcher by the name of Gary Wazlewski, who got through a few innings, and the Red Sox back were alive, and they won that game 8-4 to even the series. And they played the 7th game, and both pitchers, Gibson and Lomborg, started on 2 days rest. And that was probably a mistake by Dick Williams, because Lomborg didn't have anything, and it was routed very early. And the Cardinals won the game 7-2. The big hitters in that World Series for the Cardinals were Lou Brock and Tim McCarver. And Maris did very well in that series also. And they were.
Think about it. Who could Williams?
The Red Sox have started. I don't know.
He really didn't have much of a choice.
No. They really, they were basically stuck between a rock and a hard place. But, Lombard was not Koufax. But to come back in with 2 days like he did in 1965 and pitch a shutout, he really had nothing. And, they were spent. What's ironic about the Red Sox is that in that series, they faced the team that had the best National League percentage. In the 60s, in the 70s, 75, they would face the Reds, who had the best percentage in that decade in the National League. And in 86, they faced the Mets, who had the best record of any team during that decade in the National League. So in 3 decades, they managed to take the teams with the best record in the American in the National League for the decade to 7 games. So now we get to 19.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. The MVPs of the National League was Orlando Cepeda and Carl Yastrzemski, who won the Triple Crown. He was tied with home runs with Killebrew with 44, but he outright won the other 2. One of the things that happened that season was the total collapse of the Orioles, who had won everything in 66 and had a losing record in 67. Frank Robinson went out with when he took a knee to the head in a collision at second base, and the pitchers that were so effective in 1966 came down with sore arms. So the A's moved to Oakland, and then we get to 1968, which was the year of the pitcher. And frankly, my remembrance of that season was not very, very favorable. It was the season that I had my lowest interest in baseball, to the point where I'd rather have gone to the racetrack than go to Yankee Stadium or Shea Stadium to watch another 1-0 or 2-1 game. It was terrible. It was a terrible season. Either you guys have a reaction to that with all the the dead ball season that was?
Yeah, I remember it.
Especially since both
Indians were in contention for a while because they had pitching. They had a horrible hitting team, but they had Tion, they had McDowell and guys like Mike Lee, and there were a couple other ones. I think Vicente Romo, and they had some good pitching, and for a change, they were a contender fairly deep into the season. It had been a long time since they'd been even remotely a challenge to anybody. And,
also one of the
pitching staff, they really had no hitters to speak of.
One of the factors of that season also was the last year of the 10-team league. There were no divisions at that time, and both races, if you can call them that, were over by June. The Cardinals and Tigers went out to very substantial leads, and the Tigers would wind up winning by 10.5 games, and the Cardinals by 9.5 games. So there was no race. The Wolfsburg game was 1-0, where the run scored on when somebody hit to a double play with the bases loaded. It was just got to be so boring. The Yankees that season won 83 games, finished 5th place, and had a team batting average of 214.
Yeah.
Carl Yastrzemski hit 301 and won the American League batting title, and he was the only qualifier in the American League that hit over 300
points. That wasn't Cater. Cater only hit 290, right?
Yeah.
He won it by 11 points.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And Bob Gibson was 22-9 with a unworldly 1.12 ERA, and he, I think, pitched 9 shutouts. He was also somehow beaten 9 times. And Dave McClain became the only 30-game winner since Dizzy Dean in 1934 for the Cardinals. He won 31 and lost 6.
American League since 1920.
Yeah, and both of them won the MVP and the Cy Young Award in their respective leagues.
And the big thing was Martin Luther King Jr.
and Robert Kennedy, yeah.
And but they started I think who was the commissioner? Eckers, right?
Eckert, yeah.
Yeah, Eckert. And so he had to decide, what am I going to do? And I think that pretty much cost him the commissionership because Bowie Kuhn would come in a year later. But that had such a profound effect on Bob Gibson that he just went out and just, pitched like a lion. And, a little tidbit I found doing the research for my book is Walter Johnson, who he beat the ERA. Walter Johnson, I forget the year, but he served up a pitch. I think Detroit was in the playoff hunt, and not the playoff hunt because back then, you won the division, that was it. But you get money for third place, and he served up a base hit to Sam Crawford Johnson. And I asked Johnson's grandson, Hank Thomas.
Yeah, I read the book, yeah.
But he did. Now, Johnson had an ERA of 1.14, 1.15 that year or something like that. However, he could have had the record of 1.11 if he didn't give up that base hit to Crawford. So
I think that was
related it to Bob Gibson. Gibson
I think it was 1913, yeah.
Yeah.
But, to me, Johnson is the best pitcher in the history of the game, but we can go into that at another time. But the thing is that it became impossible. Every game was 1-0, 2-1. I mean, you had National League was a little bit better offensively. They had Pete Rose win the batting title in the 320s. And but the American League especially had absolutely no hitting at all, and it made for a very, very dull regular season.
Yastrzemski was the only one to hit 300 in the American League.
Yeah, as I said, the Yankees won 83 games and had a team batting average of 214.
It was awful.
Yeah, it was just basically awful, and I reached a point I even stopped watching it because I just couldn't take those kinds of games anymore.
Well, let me ask you guys something. You guys were both alive in '68. One of them was nearing 30, the other one was 20. What were you, 24, 25? Al?
I was 25. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in '70, but I don't know any difference. Besides reading about it, the playoffs. Now, baseball had to change because attendance was down.
Oh, yeah.
Charlie Finley was creating an orange. Designated hitter was.
Yeah, well, they went into, they expanded in 1969. Each league had 2 teams, and they knew from the experience in the 1890s when you had 12 teams in one league that wouldn't fly. There were too many teams that would be out of it from the get-go, so they split the leagues into 16 divisions and set up the LCS, which from 1969 through 1984 would be a best 3 out of 5. And the winners, of course, would advance to the World Series.
Now, let me ask you something, Dave. You're a purist at heart. Is this the dividing line where baseball literally stops being baseball? Becomes an inner shell of itself?
Wait a minute. The cough interrupted what you were saying, John.
All right, I'll ask the question again. You're a purist. You've written your books in the late 1800s. You've seen the evolution of baseball. You were born during a time, both you gentlemen, in the 1950s. You've seen baseball as king, and now we're coming to a point where we're changing the system up. We're even changing the strike zone. We're changing the strike zone. We're lowering the mound. We're creating new divisions. Did baseball sell itself out so it could get attendance to keep up with, like, the rising of football and basketball?
Well, you're making a very, very good point because, the NFL and the AFL merged toward the end of the 60s. And Monday Night Football came in, and Monday Night Football really put the NFL over the top. The very first game between the Browns and the Jets
That was 1970.
With the defending.
Yeah.
It was 70? Was that the first
Yeah.
game?
Yeah.
But anyway, but the two leagues merged in '69, or they for the '70 season, the AFL incorporated the Steelers, the Browns, and Baltimore, and they became the AFC, and the popularity in football it just began almost immediately. Included that Monday night game, the first Monday night game between the Browns and the Jets. So baseball had some catching up to do. The NBA was still pretty far behind. The National Hockey League had expanded too into cities that previously had not had Major League Hockey, and baseball was getting competition from three different angles by the end of the '60s. So you're making a very good point, Ian. It had to do something, and changing the strike zone, which was I don't know why they expanded it in the first place. I don't know what they were thinking.
Well, nobody can figure that out. Yeah, they changed it after 1962.
And as Al mentioned last week, the block rule going, crazy stuff was going in that all of it favoring pitching. And as a result, we talked about this last week, how many potentially great hitters who really were very fine hitters in their own right, even in their own time, like Tony Oliva, probably the poster boy. Their careers were disappointing. It must have been very disappointing to them, when they see what baseball was like before they came in and then after they left. Especially these guys many of these guys are still alive who played in the '60s and '70s. To see what's going on now, it's like an arcade game. The number of home runs in this year's World Series, and attendance is booming. So apparently people like what they're seeing. And you're right. I'm a purist in that way. I like to see an even balance, a 50-50 balance between hitting and pitching. And I don't think it's there right now, but it's much closer than it was in 1968 and into the early 70s. Even reducing the strike zone and reducing the height of the mound, it did change the game somewhat in 69, 70, 71, but we were still in pretty much the same era in the early 70s. And it wasn't until, pretty deep into the 70s, you had the big red machine starting to emerge that you started to see an offensive game again. And I think it helped baseball a lot. But I don't think it ever caught up to the NFL again after that. And maybe it never will.
And some also in '68, because to me, you guys lived through probably the best period and probably the worst period in baseball. But again, I can't stress enough about Marvin Miller. Gave him my dissertation last episode. I'm going to keep it brief. The first Major League Baseball basic agreement was signed this year. The league's minimum salary went up to $10,000. And they made an agreement, which I still to this day do not know why the owners agreed to it. But they both identified there must be an arbitration system for the players to at least voice their opinions. They also explored options to options for the reserve clause. But that arbitration agreement, along with the first formal grievance process, that was the death knell for the reserve clause in 1976. So, a lot of stuff is happening this year.
Yeah, the first, as I mentioned last week, the first arbitration case was a pitcher on the Twins named Dick Woodson, who asked for $28,000, and the Twins offered him $23,000. You look back at that now, and it's very, very hard to fathom that. But that's the way it was, and I think when the players saw the response to Ken Harrelson when he was signed by the Red Sox after Finley outright released him in 1967, started the roll to free agency.
Yeah, and some the players were starting to get. Miller was saying, "Look, you guys should be getting paid for the baseball cards."
Oh yeah, you know what happened? You know what they were getting in the old days? They were getting like $100 in a set of cards. Now, a set of cards from then now was worth a few $1,000, but Ted Williams was on Topps cards from 1954 through 1958, and they were paying him the astronomical sum of $400 a year. And they wouldn't offer him any more money after that, so he wasn't on Topps cards in 1959 and 1960.
And what's interesting here? All the owners through the years, they all said, we don't have this money to pay. And you're lucky to get you're playing a game that's basically for kids. But they had the money. It was proven they had the money. They, by the time, free agency and stuff like that came out, payers being paid were only 42% of the expenses that the owners, had to give for concessions and, all the other stuff, but only 42% of their expenses. Now, after Bud Selig and all this, it's only 38% as of last year. And the owners all have money, but they cried, look, this is ridiculous. We're not going to pay this. And 68 paved the way for this.
Well, if you look at the history of ownership, you can go back to the 1890s, and David is certainly familiar with some, especially the name of Arthur Snowden, who owned what became the Braves franchise for years and was the perpetrator of the reserve clause way back when, and was one of the causes. He one of the ones that was involved in the classification system that led to the Players League, and he wasn't
really instrumental in that. Brush pretty much led that.
Yeah, but because of that,
he was a supporter, and most of the owners were. They had to bring salaries down.
Yeah, and most of them were such tightwads that when the American League came into existence, almost every star player jumped. Yeah. And let's discuss the 1968 World Series. But I'll start with a prelude. I was in my first week of basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, when that series happened. I had to go in the list. I was in the reserves, and I got called for my active duty the last weekend of the regular season, and I was lucky to find out who won on the same day. And basically, I never saw anything from that World Series until I bought the highlight film when they were releasing all of those. MLB was releasing all of them a bunch of years ago, so I bought the 1968 highlight film, and I played was the first time I saw a lot of the things that happened in that World Series. And Bob Gibson, it was a weird series. Bob Gibson pitched the first game against Detroit and struck out 17 men. And I was curious about the lineup of the Tigers in order to get Al Kaline in there, as he had waited for 16 seasons to get into one. They put Mickey Stanley, who was their center fielder, in at shortstop to replace Ray Oyler, who batted a whopping 135 over the season. And Kaline went into the outfield. And Mickey Stanley would not make an error in that entire series. But their other Mickey Lolich, would turn out to be the pitching star of the series, winning 3 games and helping the Tigers to a probable win in 7 games. If I remember correctly, McLean got shelled the second time out. He lost the first game to Gibson, got shelled out when Gibson won the 4th game. And then when it came to the 7th game, they went to Lolich. And Lolich's only career home run during one of his starts in the World Series. He never hit a home run in the regular season. and there was a play supposedly that. Correct me if I'm wrong, David. I don't know if you watched that series, but Lou Brock did not slide with a run, and I think it was the fifth game, and he was thrown out at the plate, and Detroit eventually won that game, and he supposedly, if he slid, it would have been a winning run, and the Cardinals would have gone on to win the series. And then the seventh game.
I don't remember that play. I don't know that I didn't see every game.
Okay. In the
But
seventh game,
they were still playing afternoon games. I couldn't find a way to see them.
Oh yeah.
So that was. I don't think I did see the seventh game. I remember that fairly well, and I remember thinking to myself at the time, "This is the first time in my lifetime that I think the two pitchers are going for their third win in the series in the second game." And it ended up being, I think, the last time that both pitchers pitched complete games in Game 7 of the World Series. And I don't think we're going to ever see that again.
Oh,
based upon
see them pitch 5 innings, so it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And
both pitchers who started Game 7 even get a decision.
Yeah, in the seventh game, the key play was a fly ball, Kurt Flood, hit by Jim Northrup. That Kurt Flood, who was considered one of the great defensive center fielders of his era, misjudged. He turned the wrong way, couldn't recoup, and it went down for a triple, and that was enough to win the game for the Tigers 4-1. Tigers, who came so close the year before, 1967, and as Ian pointed out, with the racial tensions still in Detroit in 1968, unified the city. The Tigers helped unify the city, and everybody got behind them, and they had a very spectacular year.
Yeah, they did. They had just enough. They had Willie Horton. They had just enough hitting. Northrop hit pretty well. Cash, for that particular season.
Cash had a good World Series, yeah.
Dick McAuliffe was playing second base, but they part of the reason why they had to use Stanley at shortstop was they besides Stanley at third base was Don Wirt, who hit all 200, and to go into a World Series with a 200 hitter at third base and two sub 160 hitters at shortstop. I think Mel Smith was, it was a way to get Kaline into the lineup, but more than that, they had to get some sticks into the lineup. They could not go with, Euler was a good defensive shortstop. Krasuski was a pretty good shortstop, but nothing offensively from either one of them. And neither of them really had anything.
Dow Maxwell lived up to his offensive prowess by going 0-22 and breaking the futility record that it set by the 0-21 was set by Gil Hodges in 1952.
Yeah,
and the Cardinals, who were the dominant team in the National League for 2 years, would fall down because Bush was furious at the requests for raises after that series, even though they had gotten that far. They traded Linda Cepeda to the Braves for Joe Torre. Roger Maris retired. A couple of years later, Steve Carlton would be traded to the Phillies for Rick Wise, where he became All World. And the team would go into the doldrums and not win anything until 1982.
Yeah.
The Tigers, of course, would fall down very, very rapidly, and virtually the same bunch would lose 109 games in 1975, and they wouldn't rebound until they had a tremendous season in 1984. So when we get out of the 60s into the era of the expansion and the era and division era starting in 1969, there were many more teams would be involved, which I'm sure was one of the goals of the owners, and it meant for some unusual happenings. The biggest of one, of course, would be the New York Mets winning everything in 1969.
Yeah.
And I'm fully convinced that when the National League announced their expansion, that the reason they did not go back to Milwaukee is that Milwaukee held the Braves to the last year of the lease in 1965 and drew something like 450,000. So they were punishing Milwaukee, and the American League put a team back in Kansas City, and they expanded to Seattle, claiming Seattle Pilots would bomb out after 1 year and moved to Milwaukee a couple of weeks before the season. And the reason Milwaukee got their team back is because at that point they only city with a major league ballpark that was not being used.
The National League, as happened in the previous expansion, did a better job of picking its cities, I thought.
Yeah.
Montreal, Canada was ready for Major League Baseball. Montreal was the obvious choice. And San Diego was essentially a huge market. It never really panned out because San Diego never had a contending team for any extended length of time. But it's really a good city and would really support teams. If a team like the Dodgers came to San Diego, they'd do very well. The Chargers face the same problem. That's why they moved. And, but San Diego was a hot sports town. They just never had a really, major league caliber team in any sport for any length of time.
So in 1968, we come to the end of what I refer to as the transition era from 1946 to 1968, where you saw the expansion out to the coast, a million changes that attempted to bring baseball into the modern age. So anyway, this will be the last of the seasons, the series by season, and we will come up over the next couple of weeks with further discussions on the various baseball topics over the years. I want to thank you both. And
it's been a pleasure. I think we've done a really interesting. We've done an interesting job.
Okay, we'll talk next week and decide on something. Okay, I want to thank you both. It's been a pleasure to do this series of broadcasts, and I hope the people who listen to it enjoy it and get something out of it. Okay, thank you both. Signing off. Good night.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
Night.
Okay. As David Brinkley used to say, good night for NBC News. Okay. Take care, guys.
Take care now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right.